Hello, dear friends. It is with great humility which I would like to say a few words in loving memory of Rabbi Adin Eben Yisrael Steinzaltz, who passed away last week. And I would like to also bring some of his ideas, maybe for those who did not have the possibility of meeting him during his lifetime. But we say that a person's ideas, siftotav davavot bakever, it's like his lips are moving even from the grave. Rabbi Steinzaltz was born in July 1937, and he died the 7th of August 2020. And he was born in Jerusalem to his father Avraham Steinzaltz and his mother Leah Krakowitz. His father was actually the great-grandson of the Slonim Rebbe, Avraham Weinberg. I'm reading to you from his biography. And he was also a student. His father was a student of Hillel Zeitlin, which was actually a famous thinker, rabbi, Kabbalist, who passed away during the Shoah. But in 1924, they moved to Mandatory Palestine, and his father became a member of the Lehi, and was also, like a lot of Jews in those days, communistly oriented, wanted to live on a kibbutz in Israel, and was actually quite secular, because you had a lot of, that's a discussion by itself, a lot of the early pioneers who I call chozrim b'sheila, who were secularists who had come from very religious backgrounds. So Steinzaltz, as a young man, already in his teens, decided he wanted to embrace Judaism, I guess you would say again. And he was influenced by Chabad. That's who he studied with. It's a little hard to call him run-of-the-mill Chabadnik, but he had a great, I would say, respect for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he met with him many times, and he saw scholarship as the main road of his life. Now, it took him 45 years to do his monumental work of the Steinzaltz Talmud, which was the first attempt to translate the whole Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, from Aramaic to Hebrew. And the way he did this was because he was extending the page, was to have each page on 2 pages, which actually made a lot of sense. And he also added things like short biographies, words that were in Rashi, which actually came from the French and what they meant, about animals mentioned in the Talmud, about things that don't exist today that they used to use, whether in the marketplace or in businesses, with pictures of them. And it was a way to make the Talmud accessible to all Jews. It was a monumental work. It took him 4.5 decades to produce. I understand it was also produced in English after, and even parts of the Jerusalem Talmud he did too. And this, of course, was a trailblazer. After that, you had the Schoenstein, the Art Scroll, who did the same thing in English and in Hebrew. His was a little bit different and really was a trailblazer in the way it worked. Steinzaltz was also a man of action. He went to the former Soviet Union and set up even before the fall of communism, set up a yeshiva in Moscow, set up the first Jewish university courses in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Professor Shaul Stampfer ran it for about 3 years when he was in Moscow, from I think 1988 to 1991, literally during the time of the fall of communism. And Steinzaltz put out many books and was a prolific speaker. I want to understand the man. He was very multifaceted, had a great sense of humor, and extremely, extremely humble. I can tell you, I would walk on the streets sometimes on Leil Shabbat, and I would bump into Rabbi Steinzaltz sometimes by himself, sometimes with his wife, always greeted me. I mean, we didn't know each other that well, but if he remembered me, he would say hello. Very, very humble man, very, very down-to-earth type of person. I remember when I worked in the Dean of Students office as the campus rabbi in Hebrew University for 3 years. So I wanted to invite Rabbi Steinzaltz to speak to the students. at that time, I didn't know that he doesn't like speaking publicly unless it's to raise money for his institutions or for, I didn't know that. He likes to spend his time doing his research. So I said, Rabbi Steinzaltz, can I invite you to speak to the students? He says, you want me to talk to the students? I think students just want to be entertained. So what do you need me? You can get other people to do that. I thought that was very unusual, but only after the fact that I understand that he doesn't like using his time except for his research unless he felt it was very necessary for outreach purposes outside of Israel, etc. And but he was. I remember also one other case I had with him many years later, towards the end of his life, where I had a little argument. Let's say I was I was doing a lot of outreach with a program, my Chaverim project, and a well-respected outreach person, a friend of mine, said to me, "You shouldn't work in such and such program because you're interfering with other projects." I said, "Interfering? This institution asked me to come there." He said, "No, I disagree." I said, "What am I supposed to do?" He said, "Let's go to a Adin Torah." Adin Torah, which means a rabbinic court. I said, "Which rabbinic court?" He says, "Well, let me put it this way. Let's go to Rabbi Steinzaltz." I said, "Rabbi Steinzaltz?" He says, "Yes, if I agree and you agree, whatever he decides, that's it." I said, "Okay, this is unusual, but fine. If that's what you want, we'll do that." So both of us went to Rabbi Steinzaltz, and we sat there. First, he gave his side of the story. I gave my side of the story. Rabbi Steinzaltz pulled out his pipe. Those who knew me, he liked to play around with the pipe and light it and think and go back and forth. And he quoted from here and quoted from there. He said you could look at this way, that way, up. Finally, at the end, he says, "Okay, Rafi, I think you're right." Of course, my friend wasn't too happy about that. But then he walked out of the room and he said, "Can I speak to you for a moment?" I said, "Yes, of course, of course." He says, "Look," he says, "you're right, but what I would like you to do is I'd like you to invite that other person to join your program." I said to him, "I have no problem with that." He says, "Okay, good." That was the story with Rabbi Steinzaltz. What I'd like to do is, because not everybody, I mean, you can always benefit from his knowledge by studying his commentary in the Talmud and his wonderful books like the 13 Petal Rows on the Talmud and others. But I'd like to bring some quotes that I found from many things on the videos on the internet and things that I thought were quite interesting about this multifaceted man who was both somebody who had secular knowledge and religious knowledge and understood the vibes of the modern world while being extremely involved in Torah study and traditional Judaism. So I'd like to say some ideas for life from Rabbi Adin Steinzaltz. Steinzaltz, quote, says, "People have a problem with me. They seem to like rabbis who just speak black and white. The ones who say, do tshuva, go to the mikveh, do more mitzvot, and that's it." Says, "But I look at a person as a whole, who he is and where he's at." The Ripshitzer Rav once asked why he's so intellectual. Because doesn't it say in the Torah, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elohecha? You're supposed to be simply walking before God. And he said, "Do you know how much intellectual work it takes to walk simply before God?" Another quote. I'm going to try not to expand on the quotes. I just want to leave them the way they are. And they're things to reminisce about and to think about. Steinzaltz, about Teshuvah, says the problem with the Teshuvah movement, Teshuvah means returnees, right? The problem with the Teshuvah movement is that they try to put people into a mold. The result is a Jew minus. We need Jews plus. We need the ones who can think and be creative. Another quote, Steinzaltz, about the Teshuvah movement. Says, unfortunately, there isn't really a Teshuvah movement. They're just Jews who left the fold because they were encouraged to do so to fit into secular Israeli culture, which happened here at the beginning of the state, and now their children want to go back to what they were before. Story. A young secular man came to Rabbi Steinzaltz to learn something. He said to him, "Tell me what it is to do teshuvah. What is it?" Steinzaltz looked at him and said, "Why do you want to know?" The young man said, "Because I hear people talking about it all the time." "Okay," said Steinzaltz, "I'll tell you what it is." A man was once introduced for the first time to the Rabbi of Gur. And the Rabbi of Gur gave him certain simple explanations about something in Judaism. The man, trying to boast that he was brought up in a religious household, said to the Rebbe, "Rebbe, I am not a Baal Teshuvah." The Rebbe answered, "Why not?" Something to think about. We all have to be sort of Baalei Teshuvah. We all have to try to bring ourselves around. This is a quote of Steinzaltz about early pioneers of Zionism. Now remember, his father was really such, who had left in 1924 to come to Israel, had come from actually a very religious background, and like others embraced socialism, socialist ideas, even communist ideas in that time, which is a discussion by itself. And he himself chose a different path. He said the early Zionist pioneers were very Jewish, even if sometimes they were secular and with socialist values. He says, I once met the son of a pioneer from a kibbutz who became religious. He said, I am more religious than my father, but my father was more Jewish. You know, Rabbi Steinzaltz changed his name to Adin Yisrael, which was very popular in early days in Israel to Hebraize the name. However, a lot of people don't know he didn't do it because of being in Israel. He did it because the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him that he thought he should Hebraize his name, which is you can actually see that video when you look on YouTube under the name of Rabbi Adin Steinzaltz. I want to just say a few other things in the name of Rabbi Steinzaltz. I find some of these quotes very interesting, and that's why I put them together for you. He says, we as Jews are not the type to follow the herd. We don't like following the leader just like that. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov once said that in a place that there are no arguments, there can be no people. Talking about himself in an interview one time, after 45 years in 2010, he finished the complete Talmud in Ivrit, in Hebrew. So I said to him, what's your plan now for the next 45 years? So Steinzaltz started saying his plan. And then the interviewer, thought he was joking. Steinzaltz was very serious. He said, you're planning to do all that? And Steinzaltz said, look, the truth is it's the master of the universe who's going to decide these things. But if he were to ask me whether I should live, if he were to ask me, I think that I really should live longer, since I can do much more down here than I can do up there. So then the interviewer said, tell me in a nutshell what the Talmud is. Steinzaltz says, the idea of the Talmud is that you can ask questions about anything. That's the Talmud. So, okay, now a few statements about the Jewish people. Steinzaltz said, I care about the Jews. We pray every day that the guardian of Israel, should watch over the remnant of Israel. Shomer Yisrael, Shmor Sherit Yisrael. I really care about helping this remnant. And he said also, in general, we need faith to survive as a people, and we need intellect to survive in the world. Okay, another quote, Steinzaltz and his talks on the Parsha. He says, it's very good to recall the words of the famous Rebbe Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, when a man came to see him questioning about God, trying to understand what the whole concept is about. The Kotzker said, a God who can be understood by anyone is not worth serving. Steinzaltz was also a man who was well-read in the sciences and as an intellectual in general. And he once said in one of his talks, he said, Leibniz thought that the best of all possible worlds is this one. And Voltaire reacted and said, what do you mean? This world is the worst. As Jews, we believe that this world is not doing very well, but there's always hope. Just a few more. Steinzaltz, in a talk about the soul, said, frequently, depression, which is common these days, as evidenced by the huge number of people who are taking antidepressants or seeking psychiatric treatment, is not necessarily the result of a miserable existence. Instead, it can be part of a relatively peaceful existence in which the soul is trying to say something but isn't getting through. I find that very meaningful. Steinzaltz tells a story in one of his talks. He says, when my granddaughter was 4 years old, she built a building with Lego. She told me that the building was a synagogue. So I asked her, what's the most important part of a synagogue? She said, the people, of course. This is the way Steinzaltz saw Judaism. Personally, it's a relation between man and God. But when you look outside your window, it's about people. Three more quotes. The first one is, the creation story, Steinzaltz says, in Genesis chapter 2 finishes by saying, it's really the beginning of the first creation story, but it starts in our books, it's in chapter 2. It says, Asher bara Elohim lasot, that God had created in order to do. It says, what does that mean? Well, God created the universe. And in it, he created, you might say, well, you didn't. And in it, there are two beings with free will. One is God, of course, and the other is man. So God created the universe up to a certain point, and mankind has to create further, because man can also make this universe into something which is either heaven or hell. When man creates, there is progress. Then man is doing the work of God in creation. Human creativity is fine. One before the last. A man came over to Rabbi Steinzaltz and introduced himself as a secular Jew. And this just to show the tolerance of Steinzaltz as a man deeply involved in Jewish life, but extremely, extremely open-minded. So this man came over to Steinzaltz and introduced him as a secular Jew. It's a little video. The man was talking. He continued and gave an example. He says, for instance, I eat bacon on Shabbat. Steinzaltz said, only on Shabbat? He said, actually, yes, because I'm busy on the other days. He said, well, I wouldn't suggest doing this, but I guess in your own way, you're honoring the Shabbat. One last quote. Steinzaltz said, you can learn a lot from nature. I once learned from a tree. One day I saw a small cypress tree that was about 1 meter tall in the garden with a broken branch. It really looked pitiful, and I thought, maybe I can save it. I saw the branch was still partially connected. So I decided that I was going to do something. And I placed it together just the same way that you would set a broken arm with some Scotch tape. That's the way I taped it up. And little by little, it started to heal. Years later, I noticed that not only had the tree mended itself completely, but it was now towering over me by many meters. I thought, if this can be done to a young tree, maybe we can do the same for human beings. Shalom, shalom.